Good evening, everyone. My name's Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. MOAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. As we begin all of our programs, we like to ground ourselves in the spaces we are occupying. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcibly brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon the exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose land we are located. MOAD occupies the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, and we pay our respects to the Ohlone peoples and their elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We encourage everyone to learn more about the native lands you occupy by visiting nativeland.ca. And we'll put that in that link in the chat as well. I welcome you to tonight's program, Monuments and Memory Culture in the Bay Area. This program is co-presented by MOAD, the Goethe-Institut San Francisco, and the new Monuments Taskforce. The Goethe-Institut San Francisco currently has an exhibition on view throughout the city called Shaping the Past. It's a poster exhibition on display in the well-known and popular kiosks all over the city, featuring works by artists, activists, and collectives from North America and Germany, all part of the Monument Lab Fellows program. This exhibition broadens understanding and illuminates ongoing memory interventions that reimagine civil society. You can learn more at their website, and I will also put a link to that in the chat. I'm excited to tell you about tonight's panelists, and in the interest of time, I'm going to give abbreviated introductions, but you can find their full bios on MOAD's calendar listing for this event. Dana King prefers sculptures because they inhabit space, and space is power. She believes sculpture provides an opportunity to shape culturally significant memories that determine how African descendants are publicly held and remembered. She is the recipient of the 2021 Artadia Award and is a 2021-22 California Arts Council Fellow. Morning Star Gali is a member of the Ajumawi Band of the Pit River Tribe, located in northeastern California. She serves as project director for Restoring Justice for Indigenous Peoples and as the California Tribal and Community Liaison for the International Indian Treaty Council. Jeffrey Yip is an interdisciplinary artist of color based out of Oakland, producing installations and performances with an emphasis on using technology as a tool of creation. Thematically, his work revolves around exploring technology to facilitate healing as a form of radical justice. Tonight's moderator is Anna Lisa Escobedo. She is a visual artist, muralist, artivist, event producer, cultural worker, and a networker. Anna Lisa's goals are to support artists, creators, and grow the vibrancy of the arts and cultural ecosystem in the Bay Area. I encourage everyone here tonight to participate by making comments and sharing reactions in the chat and submitting questions through the Q&A box. And finally, please take a moment to type where you're joining us from in the chat because we love finding the diaspora in our audience. Now I will turn it over to Anna Lisa.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Just a quick thank you to MOAD and thank you to the Goethe-Institut for bringing us all together. And of course, thank you to Morning Star, Dana, and Jeffrey. And everyone for quickly being here in this virtual space. The awesome thing about this virtual space is being recorded. So I get to hear and re-listen and be hopefully re-inspired about the conversation today from all you guys. With that, I want to share that the new Monuments Taskforce mission is to be in critical dialogue. The question that we always ask ourselves is, what do new monuments look like? What can they be? And this is kind of the conversation that leads us into this, is along with asking what's new and also what's in the past, is being mindful that us here today are not the only ones that's been doing this work. There's many artists, activists, storytellers, community elders that have been doing this work years and years, But I like to think that in this moment of time where space and coming together is monumental itself, we've been in this dialogue, we've been re-looking at spaces and who is in those spaces, who is missing, and who actually was there before us. I have three top questions, and our panelists I've shared these questions to them, and I want us to just have that conversation, dive deep into them as much as we can. And some of these questions I've been asked personally, I have no clue how to answer them sometimes. So hopefully we can brighten the conversation with that. And I would love to start with Morning Star. Morning Star, hello, how are you doing?
Hi, Jimmy. Thank you so much for having me on with all of you today. I see my former professor, Santana, in Puerto Rico, where I'm just getting ready to head to Boriquen. So hello to everyone there, and especially to Professor Santana.
Yeah. And Dana, how are you doing today?
Oh, Anna Lisa, I'm very happy to be here. This conversation is so necessary and important, especially in the times in which we live. And it's vital that we hear the voices of community and share our different perspectives, and find that thread where we meet. So I appreciate being here.
Oh, thank you. I love that. I love me a good piece of cloth too. Let's weave this together, the thread. Jeffrey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Excited to be here as well. I think it's important that we're all, sharing space together, and like in these hard moments, like, specifically through COVID, we had a conversation about that and how that's difficult. And like, I know that there is like more ability to be in space now, but also like the virtual space is also important as well. And like, as another way to kind of like facilitate community and be together. So I'm excited to hear everybody's story and learn more about everybody. So excited.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask you guys, and this is a question that it was imposed in the prompt with this whole dialogue's about, is how can we elevate non-traditional monuments? And before we really answer that, I would love for us to, I feel like we know, but maybe I want to hear, just be clear and hear it, like, what is a traditional monument? And so we can better understand, like, what is a non-traditional monument? If anybody wants to respond to that, I will give more space, the first space to Morning Star and Dana to answer that, and Jeffrey, if you want to follow up.
I would love to hear Morning Star's answer, if you don't mind, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot.
No, it's good to be here in conversation with all of you, and just when I think about monuments, what's considered traditional and non-traditional, I think about the first monuments of our Ramaytush and Chochenyo Ohlone relatives, and that were the shell mounds in the Bay Area. There are 425 shell mounds, and those were monuments. Those were erected as as shrines to honor our ancestors, to honor those that have passed on. And so some of the shell mounds in the Bay Area were so tall, 625 feet tall, that they acted as when ships would come in, that they were on map points. And so I'm over here right on the peninsula, and just thinking about the 425 monuments of shell mounds that were documented in the Bay Area, and how those were mowed over to create shopping centers, to create hotels, how those ancestors were dug up, and those graves were desecrated. And so when I think about what a traditional monument is, not, necessarily these structures, but it was what originally existed on the land, and what existed in a way that was in balance with the land, and how it is that those have been desecrated today, and how the Ohlone peoples are still fighting for protection of their sacred places.
And this is why I asked that question, because I just got schooled on what a traditional monument is, and I was not expecting that. Thank you, Morning Star, for really sharing that knowledge and educating us. Also, I know there's been so many especially here in the Bay Area. There's many areas and throughout.
And I'll just add also that it was interesting. I participated in a Shaw Mound walk where we spent 2 weeks walking the Bay Area Peninsula, where we put prayer offerings down to all of those 400 plus monuments. And some of them, there were, with all respect, there were at some of these sites, I remember one very particularly at the Holocaust Museum, and there was a Holocaust monument that was over a shell mound, and I was just like, oh, this is so interesting, in terms of, what perspective is being shared. This monument to pay homage to those that survived genocide, but yet the Native peoples that are still here, still fighting, for that visibility, still fighting against that erasure today, still do not have their sacred places and burial places protected in that way.
I think of the word traditional, and I think that I hear culturally specific, and when we are elevating our culturally specific monuments, there's no normal, right? There's no one who gets to come along and say, well, this is not normal or this is normal, because it's determined by the intention and what it is we want to say with our monuments and memorials. I think about the type of work that I do, and people say, well, it's classical, figurative, and it's pretty normal. We've been seeing sculptures like that since we were colonized and before. And I laugh and I say, really? Have we seen monuments and memorials that identify the history of African descendants in this country? We have not. And so my normal is about elevating the history of my ancestors, no different than Morning Star, no different than any culturally specific desire that we have to create our history out in the public sphere. And that's, to me, the most important element, is that it is representation. And that representation is identified by source and by the person who is manifesting that mission. I consider the work that everyone here is doing is subversive, because the normal in this country is identified based on a Eurocentric storyline. And it's clearly not working for anyone. And so that normal needs to be blown up. The people selecting the normal have to make space for all of us. And even what I just said gives them more power. So I'm going to take that back, because that selection process, that power base, may apply in the museum world where there are systems of selection in place, but the planet is ours. And where I stand, I believe that we need to take up that space, whether it's approved and codified by the systems that are already defined to select the art that needs to be out there in the world or not. I think that it's our duty to take up that space.
Yeah. Jeffrey, I would love to hear from you because I feel like you work with the non-traditional, most traditional nowadays of works.
That was y'all just dropped some knowledge, and I really appreciate all the words that y'all said. Thank you so much for that. And so I guess like when talking about like what a traditional monument is, I mean, I just based on going off my experience, like going to like art history class and things of that nature, and just like what I see around me, like oftentimes like like I'll discuss like the form, right? Like I see like this phallic symbol, this like erected, and in all its glory, and like that's often like a symbol to like a monument. Or a lot of monuments are like these large kind of like obelisk shapes, right? And like and other times there's I see like a man on a horse or something like that. It's, someone's being honored and congratulated, and and it's oftentimes people that don't look like me, and I'm just kind of just like, okay, so what does that kind of like tell me or my people, or people that don't look like them as well? It's just kind of just like that it's all cemented, and like it's like so official. This like, oh, this is like a monument that we're encapsulating, right? But like, what does that kind of like speak to other Americans, you know what I mean, that don't that don't really identify with that, so I think it is kind of just like for me, my experience of what a traditional monument is like it's very rooted like in capitalism, and like and we've all been seeing this too, like through the George Floyd and all the kind of uprisings. Like they've been like tearing down all these different monuments, these to kind of represent and like hate and like these heroes of the past that were just the most racist people ever, and so for me, my experience of it is I know there's definitely like good monuments as well, and there's like there's plenty of like monuments to be genuinely celebrated too, but then also there also is this kind of like part of like American history that's celebrated, that like, should we be celebrating this, you know what I mean? And so I think a lot of people are kind of waking up to that, and that and that's, I think that's helping us grow as a country too, and hopefully there will be more awareness around that. So yeah.
Just to add, Jeffrey, I have a question, and I open it up for Dana and Morning Star too. This is Edna, everybody. Edna has a question, and the question is, how do we elevate? Because it is true. I'm hearing like Dana, you just said like traditional works, but do you see a Black, do you see African American? Do you see that? Do you see our ancestors? Jeffrey, yeah, you may not see yourself in these monuments. So what are we doing to elevate that? To see our communities in these public spheres?
Well, I guess I could talk about the work that we've been doing. I'm the co-founder of Macrowaves. We're kind of like an interdisciplinary group of artists and designers working with new media, conceptual ideas, and essentially do work in an experience. And so we kind of created exhibition in Chinatown. It's like a walking tour. And so we were kind of like redefining what a monument was in a virtual space. And I know that, you know, a new Monument Taskforce had did something similar in the Golden Gate Park. And so like those, it was interesting because those two events were kind of very like adjacent to each other, you know what I mean? So I'm glad that we connected with, on that. And so, you know, part of the idea was like paying homage to like Qingming, which is like this, you know, Chinese ancestral honoring day, you know, and it's like, it's, you know, tomb sweeping day. You're supposed to pay respects to your ancestors. And part of the idea was like, okay, well, me as like from an immigrant family and like not really kind of like being in touch and like, you know, going through assimilation and all these things, not really being in touch with my own culture, like wanted to like reconnect with that and like this, you know, and then you have this like kind of like older immigrant generation that like holds this tradition as well. So we wanted to have like an intergenerational kind of like connection with that, and like decided to kind of like reach out to like older businesses and seeing if they wanted to collaborate with us. And so what we did was we paired up certain businesses to work with certain artists to create kind of like these augmented reality monuments in the tradition of like an altar. So like there was like the whole event was called Alternate Realms, and like the whole idea was like we would create like a digital altar in collaboration with the business. Like there was a kite shop, which, you know, we'll show a video of later, and essentially the artist Alice you know, made like this beautiful kite, and they were in like dialogue with the kite shop owner, and like it was like a seamless process, and like it was yeah, it kind of like created this dialogue between these generations, right? And I think that's really important to like reconnect, especially in times of like of need, like in times of COVID. Like part of the kind of like incentive for us to do this was to kind of like, you know, bring more attention to Chinatown and like drive more business in there, because like things were hard. You know, a lot of businesses have been failing, and even one of the businesses that we worked with, like at this point, they've now closed down. You know, but I'm glad that we were able to at least work with them and do something creative together. Yeah. So yeah, essentially, you know, we were collaborating with the artists and worked with 5 different businesses, and or no, 6 different businesses, and yeah, I would say it was a success. And you know, I feel like I learned a lot about my culture as well, and there was like definitely like a lot of cross-pollination happening. So yeah.
I love that reconnecting and also just building the relationships, especially for businesses that are long standing, how to create support, that supporting network during the early pandemics. I remember that project and highlighting businesses that I couldn't physically go to at one point. So thank you. Dana, Morning Star, I would love you guys to step in and talk about how the elevations that you guys are doing in your work.
I was waiting for Dana to share this time, but I can go. Yeah, so I think, you know, even when you ask that question about traditional monuments, I think that it's important for us, that is a part of like the decolonization and, you know, reclaiming those names. So when we're talking about traditional cultural practices, when we're talking about traditional ecological knowledge, we use that word traditional. And so what may be, you know, traditional within, you know, what's considered mainstream standards, like it's a reclamation of that word. It's the decolonial framing of, you know, of what is traditional to us. So what is traditional to us is the shell mounds. You know, I think about what people may be used to within this, you know, San Francisco Bay Area, looking at the missions, looking at, you know, the forts throughout California, looking at those as, you know, what would be considered quote unquote traditional the efforts to remove the Sarah statues within the various areas. And, it does make me think about, who does get to tell these stories, whose perspective is it? When you go to whether it's Mission Dolores or Mission San Rafael, you're not necessarily going to hear the stories of, the Native peoples that were kept enslaved, that were kept incarcerated in building those missions. You're going to hear, this very candy coated version of, those missions, and, how they all worked very nicely together, but not that they were, that was considered to be forced, and that they were withheld within those institutions. And so just thinking about, who does get to tell those stories, who is, sharing that information. I think, we really did have a go moment when the Early Days statue was removed in 2019. And just thinking about that was, a 25 plus year community effort of the local Native community that was calling for the removal, that was, saying how disrespectful that statue was to our local community, how it did not represent us in any way, and how there was so much pushback against it. And then within that year, almost 9 months later, we really had a go moment, especially within the Sacramento area, where after the George Floyd uprisings, and we were very strategic about it. I am part of the Healing Justice, co-lead the Healing Justice Committee with the Anti-Police Terror Project. And so we had a go moment where we said, hey, let's call for the removal of the Sarah statue. Let's call for the removal of the Columbus statue. Let's call for the removal of the Sutter statue. And within those 2 weeks, we had 3 monuments down. And so it really was that community mobilization. It really was that grassroots effort to say, not only is this, addressing the intersections of solidarity between our movements, but this is an opportunity for us to really be in alignment with what our values are within our communities, and that recognizing that we're not going to allow these statues to stand. And the toppling of statues can be a very beautiful action of solidarity between our community, solidarity and power.
I absolutely agree. There's great power in putting forth the truth of history, and I think this is a both and, because I have shifted somewhat since installing Monumental Reckoning in Golden Gate Park, where 350 ancestral figures surround a plinth that has stood in the park for more than 130 years as a monument to racism and hate. It's a monument to Francis Scott Key. And I didn't know until I was 60 years old that he was such a rabid racist, that I have stood and sung that song as a child without knowing that the third verse called for the death of my ancestors. I didn't know that he doubled down in his position and his access to power and the money that he had, and wrote laws that further enslaved people. I did not know that his brother-in-law, Justice Taney, wrote the Dred Scott decision. I didn't know because I wasn't taught. We are not taught in this country history. We are not taught the truth of history. We are taught pablum. We are taught 2 paragraphs of the slave era, and now we want to use words like worker instead of enslaved, and so because we're not taught, I'd like there to be like a moment of historical context for the statues that represent this hate, so that people can learn the truth. I didn't know about Junipero Serra until he started to come down. I didn't know about the mission system. I wasn't taught. That's not an excuse. Now as an adult, making learning a lifelong journey, it's my responsibility to learn as much as I can. But we can help as artists. And so literally, I believe in the context of the stories in 360 degrees of truth, that if we take down sculptures of hate, then they become the secret story. And people will not learn why they did what they did, who they did what they did to, and how they got away with it. That's to me the educational aspect that is I think a responsibility. Jeffrey, you talked about it, you know, being in your own community and learning so much. There is so much to learn. And if we hide half of the truth, it's no better than the half of the truth that has been hidden about us. So that's how I see the work that I'm doing. It's both educational, and it's also a love letter. It's a love letter to my people. And along the way, if others learn the truth of our American history, then I'm beyond grateful. But first, we need to learn it. And we can help others to do that as well with our work.
Thank you, Dana. Elizabeth, if you could show images of Morning Star has sent over, that'd be great. Morning Star has some beautiful images of the community taking action, and you see in the chat we're dropping links so you can learn more. Dana, I just want to echo that. Also, we're taught to be divided as well. And this is one thing. As I'm here in Morning Star, I'm learning, and I'm also connecting with Jeffrey because I feel you. I was pulled apart in my Afro-Latino roots in many ways, and told to be this and not that, or like I had to take the moment to learn and be interested, and it takes that, and it takes upon yourself. It shouldn't have to be to do that, but in this age that we want to learn who we are, our history, who we're actually seeing in these spaces, and memorializing who are these folks. So you're right, Dana. Before this conversation, I was actually thinking about reflecting back on my mom and reflecting back in the neighborhood that I grew up in. I was like, man, I grew up in Central LA. So I was like, what do I have? The Compton Courthouse and the Watts Towers. But I don't know beyond that. So a little bit of like just history there. I want to ask Morning Star a question. You shared of the toppling and this community action-oriented efforts. Who since then, what has been the work like, and are you guys, I guess it's more of, are you guys at the table, or do you feel, is there more of a control in the narrative that you guys are able to, in the community you're with, to be part of that table, to be in that narrative of what makes a monument, what doesn't make a monument, what gets toppled, and why it needs to be toppled down?
Yeah, I think, there's times that we are at the table, but for the most part, we're not. There was, and I understand, it was a safety uh, matter, a decision that was made quickly in terms of removing the Columbus statue from Coit Tower. That was a statue that had long caused, some uncomfortability within the Native community. And there were times that we went and after the Alcatraz Sunrise gatherings that I helped to organize on behalf of the International Indian Treaty Council, we would go up to Coit Tower on Indigenous Peoples Day, and there were events that were held in terms of letters to Columbus, and really telling the truth of who Columbus was, that he was a murderer, that he was a rapist, that he was a trafficker, a human trafficker that targeted and sold 10 and 11-year-old girls and Native girls. And so, when that decision was made, our community was not informed. Folks within the arts community were not informed. And so, there are going to still continue to be times like that where, our community is not notified, where we're not given that information. But I also am thinking about the situation, that photo right there by Hulea Sinajani, that is at the Early Days Monument. That was at 4 a.m. that we were all up very early. That's my oldest daughter, who is now 18, standing there at, remembering just the many past decades of how painful it was to look at that monument, how painful it was to have Native children. I have 4 children now between the ages of 8 and 18. And so just all of these lies that they're taught, we're in conversation about how much we weren't taught, when it comes to these various monuments. But, the imagery that our children are still forced and socialized to learn about Native peoples. And so that was really significant in terms of, removing that image that Native peoples are, this quote unquote savage, that, it reflects these stereotypes and didn't at all accurately reflect who we are as California Native peoples, didn't show us in any sort of, respect or dignity of who we are. And so, having my children there to witness the removal, it really was a turning point. I think that we're at a place of truth telling and healing of our communities. And so that we need to have these statues removed. We need to not be afraid that we are standing in that moment where we are able to help to change that narrative. I think of our relatives, the IPD 5, or the Indigenous Peoples Day 5, that are still being charged with the removal of the Sarah statue in San Rafael, and how both the Archdiocese of San Francisco, it's really interesting that the Archdiocese receives restorative justice funding through the city and county, yet they are calling, at this place in time in 2022, they are calling for the persecution and prosecution of Native peoples in the removal of that statue. They've gone as far to hold exorcisms, and it's gotten a little out there. And so it's just really interesting to see how all of that has played out. But in the meantime, our relatives are still fighting these charges. And it reminds me similarly of what happened at Standing Rock, where Red Fawn Fallis was framed and charged, for as a water protector on her own lands. And so that as Native peoples, we are still criminalized. We are still, facing a lot of these, the policing and state violence when it comes to those efforts of telling the truth of our peoples and having that visibility of the truth in history.
I'm so sorry, Morning Star, and thank you for sharing. And is in in the land of, I guess, I'm always hopeful and dreaming, and I'm sure this has been a conversation, and thoughts and thinking about the next generation is, what would you, after toppling, what would your community like to see or is being seen? Because sometimes, I don't know, maybe there is already a midst project happening, if you would like to share.
Sure. I mean, I'll share that I have my 8-year-old, my youngest, with me right now. Do you want to come say hi? You don't want to say hi. So it's okay. You know, I think that it's taken, thank you, baby. It's taken 18 years of, you know, my children's experiences in the public education system. You know, they faced some very heavy discrimination, with my son having very long hair, with my children, you know, in terms of challenging these narratives. And, you know, in the classroom, it wasn't easy for them. You know, when they would come back to school, you know, after Indigenous Peoples Day, for example, and they would be questioned by their teachers, even questioned by Indian Ed staff of like, why weren't you at school? What were you doing? You know, and they would say, well, we were at this ceremony with our mom. We were, you know, we're not celebrating Columbus. We're celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. And, you know, they would get really harsh treatment and criticism from the school staff. And, you know, it's finally at a place, you know, I feel like it's taken almost 2 decades now, where my little one comes home from her classroom and she's proud to share, you know, some of our words in our tribal language with her class. There are lessons now that are culturally relevant. There's a really great one by Julia Parker where she shares with her granddaughter and talks about going to our ceremonial dance houses, to our roundhouses, and, you know, sharing about our cultural traditions. And so my daughter wrote this whole story about going to the roundhouse and her mom losing her shoe, and, you know, just being brave enough to be able to share that narrative and be honest in, you know, these are practices and we don't have to hide them anymore. And we're able to share out our cultural traditions with the rest of her class. And, you know, it's taken this long, but really proud that we're finally at a moment where that can happen.
I love that. Jeffrey, sorry, Jeffrey, I'm leaving you last. Jeffrey, I would love one, you have a video for us, so I would love to play that. But also, if you want to share more of like any of what does a monument come to be, what does that look like for the future monuments?
Yeah, you know, part of it too is kind of just like reflecting like on ancestry, you know, because when we're thinking about monuments, right, like oftentimes it's someone, you know, like the traditional monuments, right, it's like this war hero or whatever, right, and like, you know, what does that look like for me, right, is like, and I kind of like think about ancestry and how like in American culture, you know, that's not really part of the culture, right, like we don't really, like death is something that we, you know, fear so much, and like, you know, and there's not much celebration around that, right, like there's like, you know, there's like kind of like the generic Halloween that's kind of like, you know, taken you know, from like kind of like Dias de los Muertos, like it's kind of like this generic version of it, you know what I mean, but like it's not really this thing that's like thought about much or celebrated. And so that, you know, part of my reflection into the project with Microwaves, Alternate Realms, was kind of like, you know, creating a monument in that sense, right? Like we're having this like virtual offerings for our ancestors. And so that's part of like the whole culture too. Like the culture that I learned was like, you create these altars, these shrines, and like you have these offerings like food, and there's like josh paper, like it's like money, and like, you know, random things, maybe something that your ancestors liked, and you burn that, and you send it off as an offering. And so like, part of this project was creating a digital offering, right? And like kind of like paying homage to our ancestry. And yeah, and so if you watch the video, it kind of goes the shop owner goes a little bit into his views on ancestry and tradition, and I think it's really for me it's very profound. So yeah, it was a learning moment for sure.
We can play it.
Yeah, can we play the video? So this is like in Chinatown, still open, it's still operating.
Yeah, 我店是 Chinatown 盖下的。我们1972 and here same location. 清明节的话，对中国人来讲
So yeah, we put for this project, we put like posters up, and there's a whole walking tour that we kind of like encourage folks to spend money along the way and kind of just like view art from the safety of their own phones. So like again, it's redefining like a monument by kind of like bringing into this new age and recontextualizing it in like a format that we all understand as like a generation that's kind of like been working with digital technologies, right? And so like now like size is also a thing, right? Like we're redefining the size of a monument, because oftentimes there's like this grand thing that we look up at. Now the monument fits in the palm of our hand and we can all interact with it.
祭祀他们一般的话，对我来讲呢，都是买花。
How was the response from the shopkeepers when you approached them on this project?
Some people were like, confused, like they just didn't know, like, in Chinese culture, like art isn't really like, it's like not really, a lot of people don't understand art because it's kind of like, oh, we need to make money and things like that. So like a lot of people didn't understand it, but there was a lot of people that like was like, oh, really excited about it, like, oh yeah, there's this thing and like it can help, but I don't really quite understand it. But yeah, like let's do it, and like we're excited about it. And then when they actually saw what was happening, they were even more excited. And like there's this whole documentation a portion of it as well. And we kind of showcase the stories and like amplify their voices, and yeah. So it was definitely like a fun kind of like connection that we had, and it felt genuine, which is more than I can ask for. So yeah.
And I believe this video is also accessible on your website, right?
Yeah, so we don't have to go through the whole thing. It talks more about Qingming, and there's like 5 or so other videos, and there's also, if you wanted to experience the augmented reality, there's instructions on how to do so as well, and you can do that from your iPhone, your Android, and your iPad or whatever. So yeah.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Jeffrey. Yeah, how long did that project take to from its conception to where it is now?
I think because it was like 2001, I think it was about like a month and a half, and there was a lot of coordinating back and forth with, because we my first language is Cantonese, but like being that there wasn't too many people to speak to Cantonese to, I didn't really speak it growing up, and so like I lost my tongue. And so like a lot of people in Chinatown speak Cantonese, and some speak Mandarin, and some speak Toisan, and so like basically there's all these different dialects, and so we had to hire a translator and communicate all these ideas. And like yeah, so like even working with the various artists that made the altars too, like some of them could speak Cantonese or Mandarin, and and they were actually able to have like a dialogue, and it turned out like the kite owner and then the artist that actually worked with him, Alice, their families were actually from the same village in China. which was like, wow, like that's China's such a big place, like that's such a connection there. And so it was very meaningful for both parties. Like, and I felt like there was a lot of connection. Like, you know, most of the artists I talked to, and you know, the shopkeepers, like they definitely like, there was definitely like some, you know, genuine connections that were happening, which, you know, made me smile. So yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. A question, and with for language, would you say that you've also improved your Cantonese?
You know, no, I didn't, you know, actually, because I personally didn't work. I was just curating the event, you know, curating the artists and stuff. And I had created, there was an actual like physical opening as well. And I had some offerings. I created actually a physical altar that then had augmented reality, and then there was like digital offerings within that. So like there was like markers on the physical altar. So essentially a marker is like you can use your phone to like track it. It's kind of like a QR code, and like then you can kind of like experience the art, you know, sound and visual on the phone. Yeah. And so like, yeah. And I also like offered the community to kind of like, you know, do like a little prayer. There's like incense too, and people can kind of like do their bows, and then and give offerings to the ancestors. Yeah.
Love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So much there. I definitely would love to hear more. And what is it? 5 videos? 6 videos, you said.
There's like, I think there's like, all in all, there's like about like, I think 12 or 10 or 12, but there's more of the story of the shop, and we kept like, there's a part with the AR component, and there's one that's like more like deeper into the story of the shops, and it dives deeper into their experience with the pandemic as well. So yeah.
Wow. You saw my face drop. I was like, what? How many videos?
Yeah, it's definitely a fun project, and you know, a lot of people took to it too, because we did a couple shows after that, that kind of just like re-showed the work at San Francisco State, and kind of started talking to SF MoMA on various things. So there definitely, you know, there was a lot of interest in that project. So yeah, excited about that.
Love it.
Mhm.
And Dana, let's you're reckoning the past. So I would love to hear, as an artist yourself, memorializing what the past, what does that look like to you? A little bit more than what you already shared.
I would like to address that, but I'm just struck with this observation of and listening to Morning Star and Jeffrey. We all desire the same out in the world for our people, and our government has taken and used that against us, and created divisiveness between cultures, and I think it's incumbent upon us to not let them continue to do that and separate us, because we all want the same thing. We all want our ancestors to be recognized, and to do it in a way that resonates with us individually as artists and collectively as people. But that's, you know, that's a government tactic that has worked and worked and worked, pitting us one against the other. And, you know, because I think that there is enough space for all of us to do what it is it needs to be done in terms of representing our past. And that past is really to me, it's for young people take with them into the future, so that they have a deeper understanding of who they are and why they're here and what is theirs to do based on the people that have come before them. And that's, I mean, I came to my art in a roundabout way. I did not know that you could be an artist and have a life. I never got to go on a school trip to a museum as a child. The only school trip I remember was to the bread factory, because that's what they thought of us. You're going to be factory workers, and you're going to be part of the service of us, of the 1%. And I didn't know you could be an artist. And so while I've always been an artist, I didn't know I could pay my bills, right, and live until I was 52 years old. And I'll add to that, I didn't know that I was a sculptor until I was about the same age. And so I, unlike you, Jeffrey, and Morning Star, I'm in my third career, and so what is mine to do is to memorialize the stories of African descendants in bronze, a material that lasts forever, and to create it with a process that is as old as time. I am a sculptor because I can barely use my phone. I'm afraid one day I'm going to get locked out of my own house. So I work with clay, and I leave the technology to younger people. And I am not saying that to be patronizing in any way. It's just that, that time has passed for me. And part of the process is what I love about telling the stories with the materials that I use, because it's an ancient process, and it lends a sense of honor and importance to the people being elevated in the work. But I do think that there is room for every type of art that lifts up all of our stories. I hope I've answered your question.
You did, and as soon as you said that, I looked at Jeffrey like, Jeff, they're talking about you and technology. Because I'm young and I don't know how to do what you do.
And I'll leave that alone.
There was a question in the chat, and I hope I pronounced the name correct, Naomi. Will I have to hear more about the levels of exchange of solidarity between the different communities when it comes to reckoning with monuments or developing new ones? What has the relationship been like in the exchange of solidarity? I picked Morning Star. Sorry, it was like quiet. I was like, I'll pick somebody then.
Yeah, that's fine. I think that we can always do better, right? That, as Dana was saying, we all have the same goal, and I think that we really, have to look at it from that angle of that we have very unique histories and experiences within our communities and between our communities. And so recognizing the beauty in that. And I think we really need to challenge, those spaces and even those places when it starts turning into oppression Olympics, because we recognize that there is space for everyone, that it is the and, it's not either or, and that, there's a lot of there's a lot of work that needs to be done when it comes to cataloging and addressing racist monuments in all of our communities, and that whatever we can do to uplift and support one another, I am here for it for sure. You know, and just recognizing that, you know, I've just personally, I've really been just coming from this place that, you know, there's this deficiency model, you know, there's, you know, in working for various nonprofits and whatnot, especially in San Francisco, you know, they really come from, you know, this place of depletion and deficiency, and that we really need to again switch that narrative and come from, you know, act from a place of abundance, that there's enough for all of us, there's enough platform for all of us, there's enough space for all of us in honoring that unique history and honoring our ancestors and honoring those shared struggles. Is part of my work with APTP, in just acknowledging that, you know, that I know personally how to navigate and understand what it means to lead and operate under Black leadership, and that there's room in acknowledging Indigenous spaces, and you know, and so even in land acknowledgements, you know, I say that, you know, we're just not acknowledging the land, we're here to acknowledge the peoples, and we're here to acknowledge, you know, our shared resistance and our shared struggles, and that we are warriors and freedom fighters in our own right, in our own communities. And so that's not to contribute to the erasure of anyone, but to recognize that, you know, there is an ongoing erasure of not only California Native peoples' history and ongoing struggles, but of all communities of color.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. It's very well said. I mean, we're talking about public monuments, and I think, you know, there's always been the art of our respective diasporas and of our people, but publicly, it feels like to me, this is a new beginning. This is a new opportunity to take the space and to claim it. And so I know that there is this intersection of support, and the more that we can build up our own stories, the closer we can grow into helping one another build all the stories together. But I feel like the public art aspect of this is so, that's my dog. So I think she's happy, but don't worry.
She got lots to say.
Yeah, she does. I feel like, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I just haven't had my eyes open to it, but the public art aspect is unfolding now for us all. And I have no doubt that we can find a way to lift up one another while we are lifting up our own ancestors along the way.
Yeah, Dana. Jeffrey, I feel like you also been doing the work, and like even within yourself, like creating that bridge with elders, and also merging new technology with all the business owners, like just a lot of merging and building solidarity. But we like to add more to that, like within the broader self communities.
Yeah, I think it was definitely, the experience was humbling, and just like working with the different cultures within Chinatown as well, you know, because it is like a diverse, I mean, it's like there is diversity in it, you know. I wouldn't say it's like super diverse, but there is diversity within Chinatown. It's just not one type of, there's like, you know, there's a bunch of different type of Chinese folks out there. And you know, this was actually, there was actually this one experience that we actually had in there, and there was like a lot of kind of like, it was kind of controversial a little bit because, I mean, for good reasons, and I'll mention it. Like, one of the shop owners actually had a Blue Lives Matter hat on, and I wasn't there when they filmed it, but we engaged in dialogue after the shoot, and like I was like, hey, we need to actually, you know, if anything, have a dialogue about this, you know what I mean? And so we you know, approached him and said like, hey, we're not here to argue. And like, we talked about it amongst ourselves and had like, you know, a lot of discourse on it, on what we should do and if we should do anything at all, you know. And I think there was a lot of learning that was done, and ultimately you kind of just have to meet the people where they're at, you know what I mean? You can't like try to change anybody's mind. And so basically we just came at it with like, hey, like, would you be open to having a conversation with us? We noticed that you had this thing, this, you know, this hat on, and like, what does that mean to you? And so he was a little bit standoffish. Like he was he was like, feel like, you know, the way that he came off was like, oh, I'm busy. But he was actually, you know, for the short conversation that we had, he seemed to like want to listen, you know what I mean? But I don't really know if he just kind of just like went in one ear and then out the other. Anyways, that being said, it was kind of just like this interesting experience where like, oh, like, you know, even within your communities, there you might find people that are having opposing views. And I think ultimately, like, yeah, just having that understanding, you know what I mean? And like, you know, trying to do what you can, but just at the end of the day, you just have to meet the people where they're at, you know? Yeah, yeah, I still feel like there's learning to be done there, but I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. It just to add, it just reminds me of like the mask and no mask conversation. My partner gets really upset when he sees somebody with no mask, and I just be like, you know what? You can't tell them anything, but we can only do what's best for us or what we think is best sometimes. So it's, how do we create that dialogue conversation, but also like be respectful that, you know, people are going to do what they're going to do at the same time, and not feel like one is right, one is wrong. You know, Morning Star, you said it's not an Olympics, but where is the shared caring and shared a respect almost. And also it's going back to monuments, especially when you're like downtown and it's a shared space. It's like, what does that mean when I see somebody that's represent white supremacy, that represents hate, that represents somebody that most likely spat on somebody that looked like me? Like, this is not a shared or safe space to be in. I want to highlight a question that we're being asked. Profe, my old profe, Jacqueline Francis, put in the queue. I'm going to read verbatim what she wrote, and I'll open up whoever wants to respond. If it stays quiet, I'm going to call upon you. I'll be quick. But each of you is researching in order to share knowledge in dynamic ways. I'm really inspired, lifted by your strategies of working. Could you each say more about teaching, sharing knowledge with audiences, from the kids to seniors, and especially our communities that for good reason don't feel welcome in mainstream museums? I see Dana.
I'm happy to, I'll start. That's a great question. And I get the feeling welcome or not. And that's the beauty of public art, because You can come upon it intentionally, you can come upon it accidentally, but the learning is the same. And hopefully it will call to you to dig deeper into the learning that the work represents, and also your relationship to it, the history of your past. I also think it's important to participate in your art. It's like not just dropping it and going, right? And hoping everybody gets it, kind of a thing. But I mean, I have had the good fortune of having the time and the ability and the space to be able to be with my art in Golden Gate Park every week. Every single Thursday, I'm there at 10 in the morning with the ancestors. And it's been an extraordinary journey because people come from all around the world to Golden Gate Park. 20 million people, not right now during COVID, but that's their like annual number. And they have questions, and you get to talk to people and hopefully create this safe space for people to talk to people that don't look like them, to talk to people who have different stories than them, to share their stories and to learn other stories. That's, to me, the highest hope of any kind of museum exhibit or any kind of public art, is that you'll be able to talk to people about it and not just sit in your own head and talk to yourself, right? So that's I know that that's not the normal way that people encounter art with the artist there, but that doesn't mean you can't contact the artist. That doesn't mean that you can't use that new technology, send them an email, and persist until they respond. Because I think that's part of the work too. Again, just making it and dropping it and going is for me really unsatisfying. So I love when people want to talk about it and to share what it is they get out of it. That's the other half of the work. So that's my answer for that really wonderful question.
Thank you. Re-highlighting that Dana's there every Thursday at 11 o'clock, right?
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock.
I'll be there tomorrow morning.
There you
Golden Gate
go.
Park, music concourse between the museums.
Would you like tea or coffee?
Yes.
Both.
Yeah. Especially if it's cold. But
yeah. I want to throw this to Morning Star, saying more about teaching and sharing knowledge to audience. How I feel like you do that all the time. That is part of your mission. Thank you for making that your mission first. 2, is there anything other than that? I also want to 3, what is the call to action you want people, because I feel people need to do their own work too.
Yeah, Google exists, right? No, I do enjoy sharing with folks and helping to educate. But there does get to a point where you're like, you could Google that, that's available. I will share this background photo is from an event that we held at City Hall last week for National Day of Awareness and Action for our missing and murdered Indigenous women and missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And so recognizing that San Francisco has the highest number of cases of our missing and murdered relatives within inner city areas in San Francisco. And so there has been a lot of mobilizing and action around that. And it is more than, just bringing light to the awareness that we do need action behind it, that we are pushing for further policy development, that we are addressing, why there are these intersections, that go back to times of boarding schools, times of foster care, that our youth still fall through the cracks when it comes to these systems of harm. And so when I'm thinking about intersections and addressing between our communities, also acknowledging that this is a crisis in all communities of color, that there are missing and murdered Black and API and the WADA's murders that are happening, that it is all interconnected in terms of how we are able to navigate not only our personal but our community safety, and also addressing how these institutions aren't designed for us, right? So when I think about Dana and Jeff's art and how it is that they are creating space and holding that space for their communities and for us, to reclaim that space, to challenge those monuments and systems of white supremacy and colonialism. And I think that is the work, right? That is the work. It's the, taking this abolitionist approach of tearing down, but we're also building. We're building for our future generations. We're building for our healthy communities. We're building for the healing of all of our peoples and all of our communities, recognizing that, that is the point of solidarity and being, in community with one another. That really is the work. So, just want to say, as soon as I can make it over at 10 a.m. on a Thursday, I will be there at Golden Gate Park. I definitely want to meet Dana in person. Would love to, just talk more about her monument out there, and what it means to be in relation within our communities. And so I'm looking forward to that for sure.
I would love that. It would be an honor to have you at Monumental Reckoning.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Count me in too. Let's go.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, we're all gonna
Do a
show up
party.
tomorrow. Yeah.
I will put you to work though. I do need you to know that, because we clean
Oh.
the ancestors' faces and we put flowers in their hair every week to let them know that they have never been forgotten
Mhm.
and that they've always been loved.
That's beautiful.
And their faces are empty. They don't represent anyone particularly. I mean, they don't represent the physicality of a person, because I want people to be able to look at them and see their own stories as well.
They're the embodiment of our ancestors.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yes. Thank you.
And that's something I did not bring up, but as somebody that does murals and some mural restoration, is actually the maintenance of these works. Who maintains them? How specific works our tax dollars actually goes to maintaining them, but we kind of don't want them. So I just want to, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but definitely I'm sharing that thought. But I also want to give space for Jeffrey to respond to this question that Jackie Francis had in the chat about teaching and sharing knowledge with audiences.
Yeah, I mean, a large part of, because technology is like somewhat, inaccessible, because it's like it is accessible and it isn't, because like there is like a kind of like an entry level to get into it. Like you need like a certain level of like understanding of how a computer works, but then you can actually get a lot of things for free online if you know your way around the internet, so there's a kind of like an entry to barrier to entry. And yeah, so like oftentimes I will kind of like do like workshops and things of that nature to kind of like educate people on this technology and try to make it more accessible, like doing AR experiences, and even like the AR experiences on Instagram too, like through Spark AR you can kind of like create like filters and like you can get like cool commissions off of that, like I was working with a friend. He's doing, he started and now he's making commissions off of, doing his own commissions off of, this AR platform, because it's like this, there's like a lot of use for it in advertising as well. And it's actually not that difficult to learn. There's like a lot of these tools. It seems inaccessible because it's like, oh yeah, this thing on your phone, but there's actually software out there that is pretty easy to use, and it's free to kind of like create these tools. So yeah, I'm all like, I'm all about kind of like sharing the knowledge, and not gatekeeping it. And definitely if there's anybody out there that wants to learn something, I can always show you resources. There's a lot of accessibility on YouTube. There's like huge communities that all they want to do is geek out and share the information for you. Like half of the stuff that I know is just like doing research, like just Googling it, like it's on the internet, definitely there for sure. Yeah.
So one takeaway is nobody has an excuse, and nowadays we are all accessible to a lot of these possible things, but the main axis is actually just reaching out.
Yeah, I mean, there are like a lot of barriers as well. Some people don't have internet, some people don't have computers, so there is definitely a level of like accessibility. There's definitely accessibility issues in it, and technology and what I work with. And so like, I feel privileged enough to, work with it, and I, kind of like know where I stand in my place, and like, I'm thankful for like having access to these tools that I can kind of like work with and do new things, like put monuments in the palm of your hand, things like that are what I find interesting, and kind of like riding the wave of like of creating new. It's all old, right? Like it's all things that like art is kind of just like rehashed things, like remixes of like past experiences or past inspirations, but like using new tools to kind of create that can then open up new areas of creativity. And so that's kind of like why I'm excited, and like why I pursue like art and technology, and like also blending it with a lot of old traditional methods too, because I am also I also do work in sculpture and things like that. And so kind of like bridging those gaps between like these more traditional like technology, like tools of creation, and like bridging it with these new digital ones. And that's something that I find interesting. So
thank you, Jeffrey. We're almost at time. And one of the biggest questions my co-conspirator for the new Monuments Taskforce gets asked this all the time. So I always ask this question, especially in the conversation of monuments. What is a monument? I will love the audience, if you can, in the chat, to also put your response, because I think this is a very important question that we can all, like, I don't think there's a right answer, honestly. Maybe there is, but I would love to open it up to Morning Star, Dana, and Jeffrey to respond. Like, what is a monument? Anybody, again, in the chat, if you want to add that response.
I guess I'll go like to me, a monument is like, I guess to me, I'm sure it's different, for everybody, but to me, the what I want it to be is just like something that like is like community based, right? Because it's usually this like public artwork, right? And something that's like meaningful to the community, like some kind of like, is special to the people, and honors the people themselves, and can help as a symbol to kind of like inspire, you know, maybe action or inspire people to create. Yeah, just something like I'm thinking of the word monumental, right? And like how something could be like large, right? And something that you can look up to and maybe even experience. And so yeah, so partly just inspiring communities and to kind of like bring togetherness, and maybe this can be like a place where people can be in circle around a piece or something. So yeah.
Dana, would you like to respond?
Well, it's, you know, I know what I would like it to be. And it, you know, it all depends on the hands and the heart and the desire of the creator of that monument. But to me, it's honor. It's honor. It's reaching back and bringing forward a history, a representation, an elevation of people who sacrificed. Again, these are the types of people I want to bring forward. People who risked their very life and livelihood and cared more about others and bringing forth traditions and history at great expense. People who survived oppression, who survived hate, who survived to build community, to create safety, to educate, to give of themselves. Which is why we should be very, very careful, at least in the type of monuments that I do, in elevating a person. They're never just a person. They really represent their, you know, a cultural identity. Are they all like that out there in the world? No. And, you know, you know, I'm struck by the words of Dr. Maya Angelou, you know, to be your ancestors' wildest dreams. Those ancestors are our wildest dreams, and we have a responsibility to be their wildest dreams. I know he thought it was done already. This is my grandson, Joseph. Can you say hello?
Hi, Joseph.
He's my studio assistant. He's learning a lot. Hopefully he's learning a lot with the Grandma Jamma. So I'm almost done. You're welcome to stay. And but that to me is, it's a reaching back to reach forward.
Grandma, do you know I shooted all the monsters I got them and I thought.
You shot all the monsters. Okay, I'm gonna mute now.
Love to hear from you, Morning Star.
So cute. I'll share that, yeah, it's an offering. It's an offering, and that there is a distinction between monuments and memorials. You know, I think that when we think about in our various cultures, those memorials and how we use them to pay homage and pay that respect. And, you know, we look at now how monuments were used in a way to cause that harm and to cause that violence. And, that is the institutional violence and racism that we have been subjected to. And so when I shared earlier, the toppling of these monuments and statues that needed to be toppled, like that was a very beautiful act of solidarity and act of resistance, that there was so much beauty, in those moments and in the moments of the communities coming together, because it was very much a physical act of tearing down white supremacy and tearing down racism within our communities. But I think of monuments that exist. There's this large wooden sculpture of Leonard Peltier that has been placed over, various the tops of various buildings in the city. And so thinking of that, and how that represents the over 38 years of incarceration of Leonard Peltier, how he hasn't had that freedom to move around in the world. And so to bring a monument, of that size, it's very large, overlooking the bay, and there's been a lot of opportunities to be photographed with it. But I think of our little ones, and how the monuments to be created will instill that sense of pride in them, where they will possibly see themselves and have that sense of pride and respect in something that possibly reflects back their own face. And so thinking of monuments and in that way, and how we can move forward, and having images that do accurately represent us.
Thank you for that response. Thank you, all three of you, Moat, Goethe-Institut, for putting this all together, bringing us into the shared evening space. Elizabeth has dropped all our social handles, our websites, and give the feedback needed for Moat, because to do more programming like this and more. Elizabeth, am I doing your script basically?
Oh, you got it.
And of course, reach out to Dana. You know where to find her every Thursday, and Morning Star and Jeffrey, all these works. And again, I invite you to think about yourself, like, what is a monument? When you find yourself in the Bay Area and going into spaces, asking what was here before this, acknowledging that the people before this monument actually, as we heard from Morning Star, and we're all aware, still exists, still are in these lands, and who's not being seen, who's not being represented in the spaces and voices and stories, who's being honored and memorialized in these spaces. Again, I thank you all for being here. And again, there's so much other creatives and artists, storytellers and change makers and activists who are doing this work in the city. There's a lot of things happening in the city. Shout out to Lava Thomas, who's doing this work too. And so much more. Any last words I want to give to Jeffrey, Dana, and Morning Star?
Thank you, everybody. That was awesome. And I love hearing from y'all and learning. So it's been a great experience. And yeah.
Just wanted to say it was really beautiful to be a part of this conversation. I do hope that we are able to meet in person at some point, going to Golden Gate Park, whatever it takes to, be able to just continue on this dialogue, and really appreciative to Moad and to the organizers of this event for this to happen.
Just grateful, grateful for the work that you all do. I too wish that we could have met in person, but I am hopeful that that will happen. The new Monuments Taskforce is phenomenal and necessary, and thank you, Anna Lisa. Moad, been around, lifting up people for in this space and culturally diverse, appreciate the work that happens through and with MOAD. We have a long way to go, but it is happening. It is happening, and may we all pass on this work and this desire to our children and their children, and to continue to tell the stories of our people.
Thank you. Last words, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you to everyone in the audience for being here tonight, and thank you to everyone on the panel for sharing your brilliance and your commitment to truth and justice, and remembering the world the way it should be remembered, and putting those thoughts forward as well. I want to give a special thanks to Bettina Vodianka from the Goethe-Institut for partnering on this program, as well as Cheyenne Concepcion for bringing us all together through the new Monuments Taskforce. MOAD is currently open to the public with 5 beautiful exhibitions. So if you're local or traveling to the Bay Area, do come and see us. If you're outside the Bay Area, we continue to have many virtual programs every month. So check out our calendar at moadsf.org. And we value your feedback. I've put the link to our online survey for this program and all our programs in the chat a couple times. Everyone who fills it out will be entered into a monthly raffle with a chance to win a $25 gift certificate to the MOAD online bookstore. We have so many beautiful books there. I know you're going to want to buy them if you go to that site. And also the survey will pop up when you close the Zoom tonight. Thank you all for spending your time with us. Please follow and support the work of all of our panelists. Check out the Goethe-Institut exhibition, Shaping the Past, the work of the new Monuments Taskforce, and the exhibitions and public programs at Museum of the African Diaspora. Thank you and good night. Bye, everyone.
Good night, everybody.